The Trump doctrine is more like Silicon Valley, move fast and break things. Move fast and break things. That's what he does. And it may work, but boy, there's a lot on the other side that says it may not.
We're eventually going to see a campaign like Israel used with Hezbollah. Slice at the top first, slice, slice, slice. But there does seem to be mostly coherent operations here from something that would look like a centralized command and control. I don't think that's going to last much longer, though.
The U.S. as a nation, we tend to get bored with combat. So we will become bored, the nation will become bored with this while Iran continues to draw it out.
President Trump said a couple of days ago, and rather absurdly, that there's an unlimited supply of missiles and interceptors and munitions, and that's simply not the case.
Now that they've got air superiority, they're moving to the second phase. They no longer, as General Kane said, have to go stand off. Now they're going stand in. They don't have to use standoff capabilities. They don't have to use stealth. They now can bring in the bulk of the aircraft and the bulk of the weapons and the bulk of the ammunition.
Which may be slower aircraft or have, if they have air supremacy, or if they're not worried about missiles being fired up, they can loiter over airspace and really pick their targets.
And they can bring in the B-52, which can drop an awful lot of JDAMs.
You know, obviously the Supreme Leader was killed. How decentralized right now is decision making? Do you have any sense, or does the U.S. have a sense?
I think at the highest level, it's all coming back together. Ahmed Wahidi, who started the IRGC, is now back running the IRGC Quds Force. He also was the former defense minister. So I would suspect that we're eventually going to see a campaign like Israel used with Hezbollah. Slice at the top first, slice, slice, slice. But there does seem to be mostly coherent operations here from something that would look like a centralized command and control. I don't think that's going to last much longer, though.
And strategies all over the place. Every time we listen to the president, there's something new. And I think that's because there isn't a national security strategy that's being done. There's no national security advisor. There's no process that would make sure that everybody's on the same sheet of music. And because that's not there, it means that the military is sort of figuring that out as it goes. And I think if we listen to General Dan Kane, it was clear what he said, which is prevent Iran from having the ability to project power outside of its borders. And everything else and everybody else has talked about has changed over around the time, but that's what hasn't changed, is the ability to do that. And then he says that ready for follow-on actions as appropriate. What does that mean? We don't know what that means. So what we have is, in the period leading up now, within the next 4 weeks or 5 weeks, is a clash of wills. And that's what's always the case in war. It's the will of the American people and the president against the will of the Iranians. And they're going to go after whatever they can to force us to stop. And that means going after the Gulf Coast countries, going after economic assets that will force the Americans to say, no, we don't want to do this anymore. On the other hand, the Americans are going to do as much as damage as they can and to force the Iranians to give up. But I don't think we're going to be talking about regime change. It just, there's a million people in arms in Iran. And unless there's something we don't know about, there's some opposition force, there's some way to get guns to them, I just don't see how regime change is going to happen. So I go back to what General Dan Kane said, which is to ensure that Iran cannot harm its neighbors. And that seems to be what they're trying to do. Whether that can work, the one thing we know about war is it's the most complex, dangerous, and unpredictable activity undertaken by humans. And we have no idea what has happened once, as Trump has done, rolled the iron dice and gone to war.
Well, there is a lot of confusion, too, about just what those strikes have accomplished. And I understand partially that's the fog of war. Partially it may just be that they aren't sure and they're still trying to figure it out. Right. But we just don't know. But you're looking at a situation, though, General, which is on its face untenable. When you mention the economic impacts, right, there's a certain amount of pain that can be taken before Western countries are not going to take it anymore. When we talk about gas and oil, OK, we're not there yet. But when you're going to get there, you've got the world's busiest airport trying to open for a half an hour here and a half an hour there. That's also untenable. All right. You have a lot of situations that are untenable. And the question is just how much time is left on the clock.
That's exactly it. Who has the will to continue this longer? And we don't know that. The Iranians are also going through a terrible time, losing their missiles, going after the leadership. But I don't know that they can stop. I don't know if there's anybody there to stop. So it will continue to go until there's some way that somebody's will breaks in this. And I think that's the thing about war. It is so unpredictable. And this is we're only in a couple of days. Can you imagine after we go 4 weeks? What's the price of oil going to be? What's the Strait of Hormuz going to be? Can an American ship be hit? That's what happens when there isn't an overarching strategy that goes in. General Powell had this doctrine that said we're never going to go to war unless all these things are set to go. That's the Powell doctrine. And then there's the Pottery Barn, which is if you break it, you own it. But I think the Trump doctrine is more like Silicon Valley. Move fast and break things. Move fast and break things. That's what he does. And it may work, but boy, there's a lot on the other side that says it may not.
New satellite images from several key military bases in the Arabian Peninsula suggest that Iran may be trying to weaken regional air defenses by destroying U.S.-made radars used to detect incoming missiles and drones. Satellite images show damage to radar bases in Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Let's bring in retired Army 4-star officer and former 4-star general and former commander of U.S. Central Command, General Joseph Votel. General, thanks so much for joining us. As you know, these bases have THAAD batteries, a U.S.-made missile interceptor system used to destroy incoming ballistic missiles. If Iran is deliberately targeting U.S.-made radars that detect these incoming missiles, what does that suggest to you about their strategy right now?
Thanks, Jake. It's good to be with you. Well, I think what we're seeing here is they want to create an effect on us, and they've been trying to broaden the conflict geographically, and they're trying to extend it in time. So they want to have some effects against us. They appreciate how the media covers U.S. military operations, and they know that we're very, very sensitive to casualties and other things. So if they are able to inflict damage or, in worst cases, casualties on us, they know that could potentially work against us.
Speaking of casualties and damage, sources with U.S. intelligence tell CNN that Russia is providing Iran with intelligence about the locations and movements of American troops, ships, aircraft. I want you to listen to what White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said about this story on Fox.
Whether or not this happened, frankly, it does not really matter because President Trump and the United States military are absolutely decimating the rogue Iranian terrorist regime.
Obviously, the U.S. military has been remarkably successful in the last week, but do you think it does not matter?
Well, I think any commander would be concerned about anybody who was providing information on their troops or their locations or key pieces of equipment. So, yeah, I think this is something we should be paying attention to. And I would hope that in the back channels here, we are communicating to Russia our displeasure with these reports and trying to track them down. So, yeah, we want to do everything we can to protect our forces and our soldiers against threats that may come from anywhere, to include the sharing of intelligence with our adversaries.
When we look at this map of where the U.S. and Israel have struck, I'm wondering what your assessment of this mission is so far and where you think it goes from here.
Well, from both a tactical and operational standpoint, Anderson, the individual battles, if you will, of aircraft strikes and Navy Tomahawk missile strikes, they're doing very good in terms of the tactical fight and putting those battles together for an operational plan. But as Congressman Smith just said, if you don't have a strategy, those two things don't matter. Where we stand right now, I think, is the very beginning of something that the president's administration did not anticipate, that Iran gets a vote and they get to fight back. They are going to do their very best, just like Hamas and Hezbollah did, of extending the timeline. And we, the U.S. as a nation, we tend to get bored with combat. So we will become bored, the nation will become bored with this while Iran continues to draw it out. I also think we're going to see Iran putting leadership in the security apparatus. They're going to continue to replace dead leaders. They've got a plan for that. They learned the last time they were attacked by Israel and the United States what to do. And doing that is going to keep the regime in place, in check. They were trying to vote on new leaders today when those new leaders were struck, but truthfully, they have a transformation plan. They know what they have to do to maintain the offensive and defensive operations. And then finally, I think they're going to continue to raise the cost for the U.S. and Israel by continuing these fights with other Gulf Cooperation Council members. We're seeing an extensive number of Iranian strikes against other countries in the best way possible. And they're mixing the cruise missiles that they have, the long-range missiles, with those Shahed drones and baffling some of the air defense systems that are in defensive positions in those countries. So the fight is going well from an Air Force campaign perspective, but we're talking about long-term strategy and understanding what the enemy is going to do.
I mean, you know what happened in Iraq better than anybody. De-Baathification, which was the policy of the U.S., led to, essentially funneled all these people into an insurgency. They had access to weapons, they had military training, and suddenly they were without power and they were fighting back. The CIA now, there's this sources telling CNN that the CIA is working to arm Kurdish forces with the aim of sparking a popular uprising in Iran. We've seen incredibly brave protesters go out into the streets. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands have been killed. You still have an awful lot of people from the Revolutionary Guard Corps on down who are armed and have weapons and access and the levers of control still.
Yeah, there's estimates when you're talking about the Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Basij, the two major groups, along with a lot of other minor groups inside of Iran. They will continue to fight, and the estimates of the size of those are anywhere from 400,000 to about 700,000 fighters. And they all have pretty good weapon systems. They're well armed as infantry forces. I heard your question to Congressman Smith about the Kurds. And when I first heard that, the CIA manning the Kurds, I think you and I talked one time a long time ago about my experiences with the Kurds. You have about 8 or 9 different Kurdish parties that are in Iran, Iraq, and Syria. You mentioned that. They all don't get along with each other. And I'm not sure they're going to come together in a common bond like they did against ISIS to try and take over what's left of the Iranian government. It's just a mission that's too big. And if you haven't planned that beforehand, and if the US government is just beginning to think of, hey, maybe we should arm the Kurds, it's a little bit too late for that. That takes a whole lot of coordination, a whole lot of on-the-ground discussion and collaboration with those groups to get them into a fight. And I'm not sure, unlike what happened in Iraq, that they would be willing to fight against the Iranian government.
What we're seeing play out here is essentially a war of attrition. It's the ability of the Iranians to launch missiles and drones versus the supply of U.S. and Israeli interceptors that can knock them out. Now, President Trump said a couple of days ago, and rather absurdly, that there's an unlimited supply of missiles and interceptors and munitions, and that's simply not the case. But there are some signs that the Iranians had a lot of capabilities, but it's definitely being degraded. I mean, on the first day, they launched 350 missiles. On the second day, 175. On the third, it looks like about 125, and only 50 yesterday. So there's definite signs that they're being degraded. The other thing that they're working on is the launchers, the missile launchers. They started the war with perhaps 450. The IDF is claiming perhaps at least half of them have been knocked out. But they still have a lot of drones, a lot of missiles. The drones can be very, very dangerous, and we've seen play out in Ukraine. Yeah. Of course, the Iranians are providing a lot of drones to the Russians, so it's probably going to evolve into a war of attrition. The ability of the Iranians to continue to mount attacks using their missiles, what's left of them, and the drones, and the United States racing against time to try to knock out their capabilities to deliver those munitions.
In this case, I actually see the military missions being accomplished fairly steadily here. The trajectory is very good. First and foremost, of course, they went after the air and ballistic missile defenses, took those down, whatever had been reconstituted after the Israelis took them apart in the early days of the 12-day air campaign. And that's crucial because we don't want to be restricted to just the F-35 stealth fighter bombers and the B-2 stealth bombers. We want to bring in the big ones, the B-52s, the B-1 bombers, and they are flying now almost at will. I would argue that we have actually achieved air supremacy, not just air superiority, but again, I think people are cautious in making that declaration. Second, take down those elements that can retaliate. Of course, along with this, obviously, take the shot, if you have the exquisite intelligence that we had on the Supreme Leader, so many of the other leaders, obviously that was a priority at the outset, and I suspect it determined part of the timing, part of the decision to go at that moment on that day, along with the frustration with the nuclear talks and a recognition that the missile stocks have been reconstituted. Israel is going to go do that regardless. So now we're talking about what they can use to retaliate. We've seen that. All the Gulf states, unwisely, Iran has actually widened this war from just retaliating against U.S. assets and Israeli facilities to going after hotels, airports, fuel loading docks, natural gas and energy and so forth. A huge mistake in my view, because they were trying to sit on the sidelines. They didn't let us use their bases as a result of that. Now they're being drawn into it, and at some point they may actually enter the offensive operations. The Emiratis in particular have very impressive capabilities in that regard. So we're going after the missile launchers. That's target number one, because without those, the missiles don't get in the air. The missile stockpiles, obviously, some of those are reportedly underground. We're going to have to pile drive down into those with the massive ordnance penetrator, the 30,000-pound precision munition that we have, and only we have the plane that can carry it. And then the manufacturing facilities, take it all down. The drones have proven to be problematic. Of course, it was a drone that killed our 6 soldiers in Kuwait. And in some cases, we're having to launch, or the host countries are having to launch $2 million Patriot interceptors to take down a $20,000 drone. That is not a good exchange